Hi, I'm Deb Crow, and I want to welcome you to Season 3 of Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. This is a podcast where we connect, learn, and laugh together with authentic and courageous leaders from all over the globe. You will learn from leaders you haven't even met yet. You will gain new tools to add to your leadership toolkit. Leadership belongs to all of us. It's not measured by stature or title. So please pull up a chair and listen in. This is the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast.
Today's episode is very special because of two reasons. It is our end of the year episode, and today we're also going to have some little bit of changes around here. We're going to have different conversations, but about the same topic.
Wait a second. You're not Deb.
Well, that's right. Deb's not here today. I'm Kristian.
Kristian. I'm sorry, Kristian who?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I am what one could call as the sound guy. I am the sound editor of this podcast show, and I am one of the members that makes this show possible. My job is to make sure that everything sounds as clear and good as possible and that no unexpected sounds would get on the way. And how about you?
Well, I do the same thing as you, but, with words and people because I am the writer/coordinator/marketer for this show. You can say I wear many hats.
Okay, that was interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Now, for all of you that might be confused, since you might know that by this moment of the month, Deb does a solo episode, we wanted to let you know that for this end of the year, we, the team of Imperfect, decided to take over to share some topics with you, present ourselves, and have a little bit of a conversation. Now, with that in mind, I have the first question just right here for you, Gurleen. The first question is, how has working with Deb changed you?
Well, I've never really worked on a podcast before, so it's been interesting learning everything that happens behind the scenes of a podcast show. Because as a listener, you don't really think about how do they get their guests? How do you schedule interviews? That's the whole process. And another thing I really enjoy is working alongside Deb. Deb truly is a heart-centered leader who cares about the team. How about for you? How has working with Deb changed you, Kristian?
Well, of all the things I could say, I would like to talk about the one that I have learned the most from. This is about how do we accept imperfections. I know this is the main topic of the show and also the name of it, but as a musician in the field, it is always seen as a bad thing when you do something wrong. The mistake is always seen as something that isn't supposed to be there, and it's always pointed out by colleagues and by oneself too as something that you should be ashamed of. And working alongside Deb and hearing it from the guests has actually made me realize that one can own and use mistakes and imperfections as something good. So I can say that after comparing myself with some colleagues, I've noticed that sometimes when I get something wrong, I just know how to make something good from it, like learning a new lesson or just having fun with it. Sometimes it's fun just to not take things so seriously.
Wow, thanks for sharing all that. I'm not a music person, but I think I understand what you mean by this constant pressure to play whatever instrument perfectly, no room for error. And I think it's time for our second question. What is something you like from the show? What's your favorite part about working on this show, or just about this show?
Well, again, I think there are many, but I'm going to choose two. The first one is the lessons that every single guest brings into the conversation, because sometimes as a musician, one doesn't get too involved with some certain topics that are really interesting. So the show has given me the opportunity to get closer and actually discover that I'm really interested in some of the careers that some of the guests have developed throughout the past of the years. Now, the second thing that came to mind is something that goes alongside the guests too, and it is the uniqueness of the voices when they're speaking. This is the way they express their ideas, the way they sometimes struggle to say stuff, something that happens to every single human. And this is interesting for a person that works with sounds and that is very passionate about it, because one sometimes just gets into the linguistic meaning. We sometimes just focus on what a person is saying. But I really enjoy listening how a person is saying actually the idea, what kind of things they do with their voices and what defines them and what makes them unique. That is something that I really enjoy. What about you?
I guess my favorite part would have to be that the conversations are unplanned. Earlier, I mentioned that I've never worked on a podcast before, and that's true, mostly true, because I have been on the guest side of things, where a client that I would be working with and other people would try to get them on their podcast. And what they do is they send a list of questions in advance. So the guest knows what kind of questions to expect. But Deb doesn't do that. We have the people fill out a form, which we use to see if they're a good fit for the podcast. And then Deb does some research from their website, LinkedIn, and other social media that they have provided. But even I don't know what questions she's actually going to ask them, which makes it for a really conversational, impromptu, relaxed episode.
Well, I definitely agree with you. It is something that is very present within the show. Now, the next question is, what imperfections does Gurleen brings to the table?
Lot of guests say that there are too many imperfections, but if I had to narrow it down, so we don't make this a multi-hour-long episode, it would be this concept that I just learned about, I think last month, divergent thinking versus convergent thinking. Divergent thinking has to do with starting with one idea and just brainstorming all sorts of ideas around that central topic. And then convergent does the opposite. You have multiple data sets and examples and scenarios, and you're trying to converge together and make a decision or figure out what's your next step. And before I knew this was a thing, I've always felt that I'm either I can either just brainstorm, come up with all sorts of ideas, or I am in this tunnel vision, singular focus where I'm I guess obsessed about doing one thing, which can be good when that one thing is what I'm supposed to be doing, but it can also be negative because what if there are other important things that are not getting the attention that they deserve? So yeah, just having a good balance between divergent mode of thinking and convergent mode of thinking is something I need to work on. How about for you? What imperfections does Kristian bring to the table?
Well, thank you for sharing that first. I think that's information that a lot of people can relate to and that also can find useful. As of my imperfections, I would like to say that I have an obsession with learning new stuff. This might be seen as something good, and sometimes it is, but sometimes this obsession is something rather different. Sometimes I'm not even done with working on something or learning a new skill, and I already want to get into a new stuff that I want to learn. Not even finish reading a document and then just get into another one. Same thing with books, movies, stories. And sometimes that takes away some of the joy that one gets from doing stuff. Sometimes that also gives me good results in terms of how effective one is. But I've noticed that is quite an imperfection that I have. And sometimes I just need to relax a little bit more and maybe enjoy more of life.
Yeah, I would be lying if I said I can't relate to that at all. I understand this quest for always wanting to learn and find ways to improve all sorts of things and not having enough time, like literally not having enough hours in the day to implement all of those learnings, because we're all imperfect beings. Like it's the name of this show. And with that, and well, New Year is right around the corner. So we would like to wish everyone a happy New Year from Deb and Team Imperfect, which, as you now know, is me, Gurleen, and Kristian. And just remember that nobody is perfect. And even as you go into the new year, keep trying new things. Like look at us. We've never hosted a podcast show before. And here we are because Deb asked and we said, why not? This could be fun. See you next week.
Thanks for joining me today on Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. I hope that you've enjoyed the show today and learned some new tools for your leadership from our amazing heart-centered guest. And if you like the show, we would welcome a rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. And we would love to have any comments or feedback at any time. And if you want some more heart-centered goodness, head over to our daily blog, masteringtheheart.com.